My Lords, I rise to speak to my amendment number 44, supported by the noble Baronesses Fox of Buckley and Hoey. And I found the speech from my noble friend Baroness Morrissey very interesting, and I will refer to that shortly. Fundamentally, the current Clause 9, calling for a 150-metre buffer zone or safe access zone, I think it's now being purported to be, is not supported by the necessary evidence and research data to justify placing on the statute book such a law, which would be a substantial incursion into freedom rights of the individual. My amendment is not about abortion or abortion clinics per se. It is about good law or bad law. We have heard much at second reading and committee stages about the 2018 Home Office review on this matter and its judgment word, disproportionate. At this time, we do not have the evidence that such a clause as it currently stands is a proportionate response to activities nationwide around abortion clinics. Therefore, we need a review, establish the facts about what is going on, and respond accordingly. After all, again, as has been mentioned previously, we do have laws, including PSPOs, which are available for dealing with egregious practices. Buffer zones can be imposed by local councils when deemed necessary. Bournemouth, Birmingham, Ealing are examples. And the only activity currently being reported by the media that I am aware of is the arrest of 2 women for praying, and also the fining of a veteran who paid for his girlfriend to have an abortion 22 years ago for the same reason, praying. I disagree that the Supreme Court judgment on Northern Ireland justifies this law on our statute books for 3 reasons. First, we have had abortion for over 55 years, whereas in Northern Ireland this option has been legally available for less than 4 years. Moreover, second, it was made so in circumstances which in themselves have provoked much anger. Finally, with respect to Northern Ireland, key to the Supreme Court's reasoning was the evidence which the Northern Ireland Assembly considered before passing the legislation. Those resting their arguments on what has transpired there actually strengthen my argument that a review should come first before even crafting legislation here. Similarly, we are not the US and should not be making preemptive legal strikes in responses to changes there without the evidence from our own jurisdiction, albeit there has been a dramatic US response to the decision of their Supreme Court on Roe versus Wade. At this point, I would add that, having read my noble friend Baroness Suggs' amendment, she has clearly thought long and hard after listening to opposing views during the passage of this bill. I can see how hard she has worked to refine what was referred to by one of its authors in the Commons as a blunt instrument. Similarly, I sympathise with the sentiment that we need to respect the will of the Commons. However, confusion was unnecessarily caused by making this a conscience vote in the other place, as I said at earlier stages. Voting for buffer zones should not be identified with voting for women's rights to access abortion. That is not what is at stake here. We can respect the will of the Commons, but still require them to think again about immediate nationwide restrictions on access to a public space. Turning very briefly to the amendments in the name of my noble friend Baroness Morrissey, again I respect her efforts to craft a clause that is more human rights compliant and otherwise fit for purpose. However, neither she nor Baroness Sugg deal with the substantive underlying principle of the need for a body of conclusive evidence before bringing a bespoke criminal regime into force for activities outside abortion centres. Her amendments are closely derived, as we've heard, from legislation from Victoria, Australia, cited by the Supreme Court with regard to Northern Ireland. But again, paragraph 151 of the Supreme Court judgment refers to evidential claims that were available to point to legitimise drawing on the Victorian situation. Our Parliament does not yet have that evidence, and this is why I will be unable to vote for her amendments. However, my amendment takes seriously the possibility that legislation might be needed, but it gives the Commons a proper opportunity to debate how the proportionality of such restrictions can be established through the same evidence-based process typically required in every other area, and which other jurisdictions have drawn on in this area. So may I ask your lordships, why the rush? Clause 9 and the process that led to its being added to the bill in the other place has many of the hallmarks of emergency legislation. Adam Wagner's book, Emergency State, which details flaws of the emergency COVID laws, provides salutary warnings about proceeding too hastily. He makes the point that, quote, the brute force of emergency lawmaking does damage and we need to avoid making the same mistakes again, unquote. Emergency states are, he says, ignorant. Decision makers have to rely on limited and potentially unreliable information. Little scrutiny can lead to ignorant decision-making and corruption. It results in many hidden injustices which may never come to light, or at least not until much later. And the vast powers can well outlast the emergency which was used to justify them. There is not even the need for emergency legislation here, as there was with the COVID outbreak. Surely a review, as detailed in my amendment, to be completed within a year, would provide Parliament the evidence to produce a considered response to what is actually going on near abortion facilities. We are all aware that abortion is a contested ideological issue. The two opposing sides hold different views which are legally allowed to be held and expressed. However, I would return again to my point that this bill is not about the rights and wrongs of abortion. It is the public order bill, and as such is how Clause 9 should be viewed. Is there sufficient public disorder to warrant such an incursion into a citizen's civil liberties? The answer is, we don't know. Therefore, we need a review. My Lords, I commend my amendment for your consideration and beg to move.